Today, in conjunction with the America First Policy Institute, I'm filing as the lead class representative a major class action lawsuit against the big tech giants, including Facebook, Google, and Twitter, as well as their CEOs, Mark Zuckerberg, Sundar Pichai, and Jack Dorsey. Three real nice guys. Our case will prove this censorship is unlawful, it's unconstitutional, and it's completely un-American. We're going to hold big tech very accountable.
This is Outnumbered. I'm Emily Campagno, and here today, my co-host Kayleigh McEnany, Fox News correspondent Julian Turner, former State Department spokesperson Morgan Ortagus, and in the center virtual seat, Jesse Watters, co-host of The Five and host of Watters World, and author of the brand new book, How I Saved the World, which we are looking forward to talking about a little bit later in the program. And Morgan, this is against the landscape of the DOJ now advertising to hire new attorneys in their fight against what they argue is a monopoly of these big tech giants. So could this be a sort of a full frontal scale assault on these guys from all aspects of the public here through all the forums possible?
Well, that's a good point, Emily. I mean, listen, when we get the actual lawsuit, we're certainly going to depend on lawyers like you and Kayleigh to give us the facts. I'll tell you, I think from a PR perspective and zooming out to the bigger picture in all of this, there is a monopoly on information by all of these major social media companies. And that's really, I think, getting to the heart of what Jesse was talking about earlier, that former President Trump is trying to address. So whether the lawsuit is successful or not, I think this is part of the plan and part of an ability to try and break up this monopoly on information. So we'll certainly see if they're able to do that. You know, I think about, we all remember back in history looking at the breakup of Standard Oil, right, in the 1890s, whenever the American Supreme Court really started going after big monopolies. I think comparatively, these social media tech monopolies on information is even bigger than those monopolies in American history. So I think it's incredibly important. I would also note, and this is obviously breaking news, the president just had this press conference before we came on. Senator Rubio just introduced a bill, I was just reading about this, where he is saying that fact-checking labels, trending topics, and algorithms should not be subject to Section 230, which is what we all know these big tech companies hide behind as it relates to lawsuits. So we should really watch this Rubio bill in addition to the president's lawsuit.
Morgan, coming to you, you're a new mom. And, you know, McAuliffe says this is a right-wing conspiracy theory made up by Donald Trump, except here's one of the books that's being taught in our schools. It's called Not My Idea, a book about whiteness. And here is what that author, her name is Anastasia Higginbotham, the author gave this quote. The Not My Idea author, she says this: whiteness is the reason these killings by police happen, the white cultural mindset that tells us white is good and innocent, while black is bad and dangerous. Whiteness is the reason cops make split-second decisions to fire their weapons into the body of an unarmed person who is black, while not even reaching for their weapon during interactions with armed and violent criminals who are white. Doesn't seem like this is a conspiracy theory.
Well, also the big problem from this book, from what I understand, is that it is being taught to kindergarten and fourth and fifth graders. So these are elementary school children that really just don't have yet the maturity or the mental capacity. I mean, they're children. They're tiny children. They shouldn't be talking about shootings, right? And things that are just quite scary to them and totally beyond their comprehension. But I really think Emily hit the nail on the head at the beginning of this segment, which is something that I'm just so passionate about, and that is school choice. You know, I am grateful that I have the ability, thank God, I have the means to determine where my daughter will go to school one day. But I also think that every parent in this country who doesn't have the same maybe means that I have should have that same choice and that same ability. And that's why we've been doing school choice in Florida, where you are, Kayleigh, for over 20 years. And that's why I would encourage every Republican legislature, governor, or even Democrats who agree with us in this country, if you haven't been pushing school choice choice in your state, you should be. One final point, Kaylee. Did you know that there are 1.5 million less children in public schools in this country than there were a year ago? There's a 22% drop in pre-K. And those numbers are because these parents are clearly deciding that these types of things that are going on in school are not appropriate for their children, beyond the fact that they haven't even been teaching for the last year.
I was going to say also COVID.
Right.
They're mismanaging the cities, they're mismanaging the border, they're mismanaging the energy sector in this country. And after a while, you don't even have to sell that. It hurts and impacts regular people on a daily basis.
That's exactly right. And Morgan, our tax dollars are paying the salaries of the incompetent, abdicating elected officials here. At what point as well will the mainstream media wake up from the Truman Show and start to hold them accountable?
Well, I think that's a good question, Emily. I think it's gonna require parents in Chicago, normal people, right, that are just sick of their children not being able to ride public transportation without dying. Right? It's going to require average Americans to stand up. I mean, listen, if you want to talk about gun control, that's fine, but most of the homicides that are happening in Chicago, for example, are happening through illegally acquired weapons. You've got light sentencing there. You need to allow the police and the prosecutors to actually prosecute these criminals. When there's light sentencing, when people feel like they can get away with it, then you see there's no incentive to stop the behavior. So I think it's going to require average citizens, average moms and dads who say, you know what, my kid in Chicago should be able to ride public transportation without getting killed, just like they can in plenty of other states around the country. And there is such a mismatch between the safety if you live in Chicago or you live in Dallas.
There is pushback now after President Biden has announced to have government contractors literally knocking on Americans' doors to get more folks vaccinated after falling short of his July 4th goal. The president announced his new aggressive approach to boost vaccination rates yesterday. Take a listen.
So please get vaccinated now. It works. It's free. And it's never been easier. And it's never been more important.
Morgan, I guess in the Biden administration's defense, they're saying, look, we're not showing up on your doorstep and jabbing you with needles. We're showing up on your doorstep and trying to give you information, making sure you know where to go to get a shot, making sure you know it's free, blah, 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 giving you all this. We're trying to inform you. So does that kind of help the case or not really?
So it doesn't help. The problem is the strategy is not going to work. It doesn't help the people who are most skeptical about the vaccine. So that's my problem with it. There was a Politico article today that talked about how the vice president's husband went to, I believe it was Chicago, went into barbershops to try to convince some of the people who were skeptical. And when they left, they were interviewed by the Politico reporter, and they said, we think it's really cool that the vice president's husband was here, but we're still not getting the vaccine. So the challenge is getting the most skeptical Americans to take the vaccine. And I don't think this is the most effective strategy. Instead, they should work with primary care doctors around the country. People trust their primary care doctor, and that's where the government should provide more information and more services.
Shikari Richardson will have to put her Olympic dreams on hold. Officials announcing the star sprinter has been left off the Tokyo relay team after she got suspended for testing positive for marijuana. Meantime, Richardson tweeting shortly after the decision, the attention that is on track now and was because of very, very few names. So if that's where fan support lay, you can't be mad at that. Morgan, to Jesse's point, though, Clay Travis this morning said marijuana doesn't affect the race, but what does is biological men competing in women's sports.
Well, I guess that's a good point. I think I'm going to have to side with Team Jesse here. You know, she should follow the rules, but I'd like to see an exemption. I do think Jillian's right. We should look at this from a larger perspective. It's not cocaine. It's not heroin. It's weed.
So thank you, Jesse Waters. Excited to read your book. You guys, thank you so much for being here today and for watching. And now here's America Reports.